they decided to revamp the Texaco station on the west side. I mean, the McCornack Oil Station, and become Texaco.
That's the filling station. The bay on to the right.
Yeah, they eventually had one, but originally they didn't have the service area. Can't get it. Not yet? And these were some small little snapshots someone took, and here again, no more roof over the fuel pumps. And this is looking, southeast to across Main Street and South 3rd Street.
That's on the side of the filling station restaurant. That's the
That's where the
beer garden or
the outside.
restaurant or whatever. I don't know what it is.
Yes, they kept the station look, that white, almost plastic look. And unfortunately, then we got into World War II. I remember my parents talking about not only the Victory Garden, but all the other things. You had to watch how much gas you bought, your food, you couldn't buy too much food. And I'm going to show you again this picture of my Aunt Lois, who I so admire. And there she is holding little round-faced me. And that's at the Fulton Avenue house. And there's my dad. And there's his mother, Martha. And that's one of Martha's sisters and her husband, Mr. Dudon. And I just love the way Lois is holding me. And I'm making a face at the camera. And I added, like, she was such a dedicated teacher and did a lot in the community. Every year, McCornack Oil Company would have their company picnics. And I'm sitting down somewhere in the grass. And here again, last time I was here, we talked about half the people in the picture, because these employees would stay with the company for years and years. And then one of our classmates from 1960, he's here in the picture too, and that's Jim Wheeler, because his dad worked for McCornack Oil Company many, many years, and he and his wife, Doris, are in the picture too, as well as Tom's great uncle, right? Great uncle, Carl Anderson, and Carl, was he the youngest of the children of Anastina?
Next to the last.
And Carl was with Charles McCornack, I'm sure from back in the 20s, right? Because your great uncle Bill also worked for McCornack Oil.
Yes.
But Carl was with him, as you will see, through the sale of McCornack Oil to Texaco. And here I believe is the Veterans Day Parade, and Lois had gone on and become a proper nurse's aide at Del Nor Hospital. And as it mentions in a newspaper clipping on the next slide, she was very active in helping get the hospital going. In other words, helping Delora. And unfortunately, at the age of 41, Lois had a bowel problem that she'd had before. And she'd been at school and had been at a cultural meeting at the Baker Memorial Community Center that evening, and came home and told her mother that she had a really bad side ache. And they called Dr. Potter. He came over, and then he came back later because they lived almost back to back, and took her to the hospital, and she passed away. So it was a shock, like so many things when someone in your class, your classmates, your teacher, when something happens. And that's when the trustees at the hospital decided to set up the Lois McCornack Del Nor Fund. And in there it mentions how she was active. And since I didn't have any other pictures of farmers with their fuel pumps on their farm from decades back, when Charles McCornack's trucks, which is in the film that my brother has brought, they would deliver out to farms, because as somebody down before I left town, said, oh yeah, well, they couldn't drive their tractors into town to get gas. So farms had a fuel pump. And if you look at the back of the photo there, you can see the one that was at the Evans Game Farm, because from way back, they moved out there in 1913, west of town, and they had a very big operation with selling game birds, feed. There was a railroad spur right across from the house and farm, and eggs, all kinds of things. So they needed lots of vehicles and had lots of people working there. And even when we were young, there it was there. So that's what most people that were on farms would have seen in their farmyard. And by 1951, a decision's made to have Bob and Lynn took over running this building. And it's Bob and Lynn, your Texaco men. They were swell guys. And we had one of Lynn's daughters in our class, Davis Askeland. McCornack then, of course, has moved almost kitty corner from the block they're in here to, as some of you might remember, the Amling store was in. And then the McCornack Oil office was a little small skinny office right next to our Firestone store. So it looks like McCornack's wanted to take the tires sales and anything else that Firestone was selling, everything from radios to phonograph players and Christmas time toys. And here we are on Main Street, and sidewalk sales were a big thing. So in front of the Firestone store, there's our dad in his Scots kilt. And there's Helen Anderson, and she's office manager from the time over there till they moved the offices over to South 3rd Street.
That was Glenn's sister.
Whose sister?
That was not a relative of mine except by marriage, and her brother worked for Colonial for 50 years, Glenn Anderson.
Oh.
But, so that's his sister that never married.
And then Glenn's younger boy was at a surprise party for you that Chris did, and that was Richard
Microphone.
Anderson, and that was Glenn's son.
Yes, Richard.
And I had him in one of my 4th grade classes at Shelby. And there we are, Elmore and Donald and Martha decided they needed to move the Firestone store to a piece of property that Charles had bought back in 1927 on South 3rd Street. So they built this new building. In the back, there was already an existing building where they had all the tire changing apparatus, tire storage, and all the nuts and bolts that went along with what you stored. I remember helping my dad with inventory, counting all these little things in little boxes on all these shelves. And then they made McCornack Oil just like it was on Main Street, a small office attached through a doorway to the McCornack Firestone store, so it was all right there.
And what is this building
Now? Oh, what is it now? It's now, I didn't realize it, I just,
It used to be Napa Auto Parts for a long time, but now it's something else.
It's a printing company.
West
Third
Valley
in
Graphics.
Illinois.
Printing company.
3rd in Illinois Street.
Illinois Street, okay. Illinois Street Bridge.
Yeah, 3rd.
So we seem to be missing some text here.
It's okay. And here's where Texaco buys McCornack. I don't have any inside knowledge on this. This was done as far as a decision through the board. And where is it? It mentions the board at that time because Charles has passed on. By now, my grandmother McCornack dies at the end of 1960, so she was president. So now my dad on the board of directors is president. Carl Anderson, Tom's great uncle, is vice president from 60 to 68, yeah, 1960 to 62, unless it was before that. And Donald, my dad's brother, was passed on in 1959. So Herb Borman, who's related to Borman Hardware Store family, he's treasurer, and my Aunt Lola is secretary. And a decision is made because these people hold stock. To be a director, you don't have to hold stock, but both Herb and Carl, I believe, had stock in McCornack Oil. And the decision was made to buy Texaco. I don't need to be repetitive, but you can see how it got divided up. Elgin Oil still existed by 1963, and apparently it was sold. I'm sure it was a small company. Okay, can you? Nice picture. My dad, I think that was done either before they went to a trip to Europe in the 60s or just before he took his job with mayor and publisher C.V. Amanoff to work at the Chronicle. And of course, my dad's avocation was sports, and he knew a lot about passports. He was one of these people that knew about all the baseball teams in the past, but he was devoted to the high school sports here. And we'll do a quick review of the McCornack building. Are we okay?
It jumped.
Yeah,
I went back.
It didn't go
we
back.
went ahead one.
There you go.
They leased the building here because Texaco now owned the building and the property. They leased it to various groups of people who ran the station. And in 1977, Archie Bentz and his wife, Linda, took over the lease. And then in 1986, Texaco sells to Mobil. And during this time, all over the U.S., the EPA was going to the remediation of leakage of fuels and any other chemicals that were in the ground. So here's Archie and Linda Bentz. And then in 1991, he's trying to purchase it. And it was a reasonable price until they found out that they had to, Mobil demanded they have testing done, and they found contamination. So Archie said, I'm sorry, I can't pay for all that. So he had to drop his idea, but he said he really cared for the station. And in all those years, Texaco would come in and want to paint all the brickwork, all the bricks, and change it in red and white, and so did Mobil Oil. And he said, I used to fight them off, fight the painters off, because I said, don't you dare change this. And we'd come back here, in Christmas time even, to go tobogganing out in La Fox, near where my brother Bill lives, and Mary Jo, yeah. And we take a picture, and here's this poor lonesome building. And here we are today. And they're wonderfully celebrating 90 years here for this building.
Who was the architect that made this the gas station a museum? You know?
Oh, Mr. Dixon?
Yeah. You know he's here today? Somewhere he
Stand
was.
up.
Stand up,
Let's
stand up.
Hey!
Yeah, that is fascinating, yes, good job. And then we want, those of us, well, maybe everybody that went to St. Charles High School and graduated from St. Charles. So my brother Bill wants to make sure that he's recognized, obviously I did. Evan and Brett graduated St. Charles, Bill's son, Andrew McCornack, AJ, who is successfully now an electrical engineer.
Well, Pat is class of 60, as is Tom Anderson with it.
Yep.
Evan, what's your class graduate?
1980.
1980, I'm 71, and you're No, in 98.
98.
98 started. So there's 3 St. Charles High School, 4 graduates there in our family.
And our family, yes, so we're trying to hold the fort down.
You guys playing that film or not? Anybody want to see it?
Well, are there any questions? from
Yeah.
Yes,
staff
yeah,
or-
any questions, I didn't stop, one of my little docents in the museum where I'm at, she said, are you gonna let people ask questions after you show each slide?
No questions.